In today's episode, we're going to hear more about the Little Potato Company. We're going to hear from Angela, the co-founder and CEO, about really the success that they've had growing a little company with little potatoes into a big company with little potatoes. We're going to hear about how they first started their family venture on a small farm just outside of Edmonton. We're going to hear about how they've used their personal and family values to grow a business and grow a business family, and really talk about how this entrepreneurial vision has grown into a pretty large agricultural organization across North America with a lot of focused leadership that has gone around the dynamics and power of business families, and really looked at how you can use those values to grow, and really looking at how you can continue to improve through innovation and new ideas to become a better company, but also a better business family. Well, welcome to Table Talk. Today, we're thrilled to be sitting down with Angela Santiago, co-founder and CEO of the Little Potato Company. As you know, Table Talk explores the stories and success behind business families and their journeys. Today, we're going to dive a little bit more into this remarkable family journey and talk about some of the success and kind of struggles and opportunities that they've had along the way. So to start out with, we want to kind of dive into really kind of what started this idea and how it kind of transformed into this now beloved brand that we see just about everywhere. So Angela, welcome. For those for those unfamiliar with the Little Potato Company, could you maybe give us an idea of give us an overview of what makes Little Potatoes special?
Got it. Well, thank you. It's a pleasure being here. I love talking about business, but in particular, I love talking about family business. So nice. I'm grateful to be here today. So I started the company with my dad in 1996, so probably about 29 years ago. Both my parents were immigrants to Canada. They came at completely different times. And the reason why I tell you that is because I think there is a sort of entrepreneurship that comes with immigration to a new country. Definitely, when you don't know the language and you've got to start all over from scratch. So this definitely is a story of starting from scratch. And so both my parents, very entrepreneurial, had many business ideas. So this was one of the ideas that my dad had. And I was just finishing up graduating at University of Alberta, poli-sci major and a history minor. So absolutely no agriculture background.
Yep.
And my dad was, we were doing drywall and taping, so it was another business idea he had, and I was helping him a bit during the summer and off when I was not in school. And he had happened to come upon this small little cafe on the west side of Edmonton, and he entered it just to grab a cup of coffee. And there was a few gentlemen sitting at a table, and they were talking Frisian, and that is a language in Holland, in a province in the Netherlands, maybe spoken by 2-3 million people.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, it's a very small language. And he overheard them talking about little potatoes and, reminiscing about, them eating little potatoes as young children as they'd pull it off the field. And my dad left there and he's like, that's it. That's the next business idea. So he came to me and said, hey, I got this idea. Like, why don't we do this together? And you know what? I was 20 something years old, just graduated. I didn't study it. Be honest, I was not at all interested in agriculture or potatoes for that matter. Like, how boring is that? Yeah. And also I was not that keen on being in business with my dad. So I said, look, I'll help you get it started, but then I'm going to go off and do something else. So we started with a 1-acre test plot. We planted it all by hand, harvested it by hand. We washed it in a bathtub. And then somehow he convinced me to go around the city and sell them to local delis and restaurants. And that was sort of the start from there. Here I am sitting here with you, and I never left.
Wow.
So I have learned a lot about potatoes over the last 29 years and running a business.
Yeah. And so maybe let's go back to those early days. I've heard the bathtub story a couple times where you're washing these potatoes in the family bathtub. What was it like kind of starting to work with your father? Did you guys always get along? Like, how did that go for that first summer? Maybe?
So here's the thing, and I recognize it now. I have young 20-something-year-old children, and there's something that a parent can see in a child that we don't always see in ourselves. Mm-hmm. And so I think my dad saw that I had an acronym for whether it's business or sales or something like that. So he really kind of pushed me in the forefront. And so that was, I think, a very positive experience for me as a parent, seeing a gift in their child and kind of putting them in a position where they might succeed. So in the beginning, it really was, you did everything. Pulled the potatoes out of the ground, washed them, put them in a bag, and then, drove around the town. So those memories are quite fond for me, because there's also the other piece of other family members like my mom and my brothers that sort of helped along the way. And so it in the beginning, it was very much a family affair. It was a small idea, had no idea where it would go at that point. Yeah. And it came with its arguments. It came with its disagreements. And I'm sure in those first 5 years, I quit many times. In absolute frustration. Yeah.
Do you remember any of those like early, probably small arguments that stick out for some reason? Or not even arguments, maybe disagreements.
No, yeah. So there might be a theme of, a dad telling his daughter what to do, mm-hmm. right? And that usually doesn't go over well. So it's one lesson I try to remember with my own children. But I think in general, we were really aligned with the product. We really believed in it, and we very much didn't, I would say, overlap on a lot of things. I did sort of the front end, so the sales piece, and then my dad was more of the anchor in the growing. So there was a lot of compliments there that happened. So there was some friction in the beginning, but I think as it grew, that's when some more, I would say, strategic business decisions had to be made that we didn't always agree on. Yeah. Okay. And I can give you an example. When we were contemplating going into the U.S., my dad was pretty adamant that we had to go partner with mm-hmm. other big companies in the U.S. And I wasn't very sure of that. And partly was because I think, it was our baby. I liked the autonomy of running a business. And so I didn't want to give that up. But nonetheless, I did my research, and we went to interview several big companies in the U.S. And I left going, no, we got to do this our own. And my dad eventually got in behind that, but that was, I would say, one of the bigger friction points. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. We'll dive into some of that growth stuff in a little bit.
Yeah.
But so when you kind of talked about the idea of your dad pitching these little potatoes, I think you sounded a little bit skeptical at first.
Yes.
Do you kind of remember maybe the turning point of when you're like, actually, these potatoes have little potatoes have big opportunity? Like, was there that shift someplace?
Yes. There's two stories to that. One was we sold, we had an order for the Banff Springs Hotel. And that for me was like a feather in the cap, because I was like, wow, a chef of a, pretty respected hotel was like, this is a good product and I want it. So that was the first sort of thing that I thought, oh, wow, I think we're onto something. The second big one was the IGAs in Alberta. We had cold called the buyer, and I ended up coming, and we had about, I think, maybe 30,000 pounds that year. It was, I think, the second or the third year we had grown. So we had not very much. And so cold called the buyer. And at that time, there was this large staircase that would wind up to the second floor where all the buyers were. And he came and met us out in the stairway. And I showed the product, and I said, I got about 30,000 pounds of it. And right there, he said, I'll take it. And that was it. And so we sold our whole first crop to local IGAs in Alberta. So that was sort of the second big, in the beginning, that, okay, mm-hmm. we're on to something. And yeah, that was a lot of validation for us to keep going.
Wow. And that would have been a pretty huge moment.
Yeah, that was, yeah.
We have this whole thing we're going to sell, and then all of a sudden they're all gone.
Yeah. So, and I'll tell you a little bit behind, I found this out years later. I guess the gentleman had brought a sample of the product home, and his wife had said, you have to list this. This is really good product. And so, yeah.
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 So that kind of family component early on too.
Yeah.
So that kind of really helped to shift your perspective of, we might be onto something here.
Yes.
What were some of those kind of big lessons in those early years? Was it, the persistence, the innovation around, trying to make those small improvements to make things easier as you're growing?
Well, I think first of all, and I'll say this, my dad has a love of agriculture, but he has no agriculture background either. Prior to starting Little Potato, he was special assistant to the Minister of Agriculture, Eugene Whalen, for a number of years. But I think that's where his love of ag grew. I think the first thing that probably helped me was my naivety around potatoes and how to sell into retail. I thought you could just call these buyers up. And so that actually worked in my favor. There were a lot of obstacles in the beginning. It was a new category. Everybody knows potatoes, but didn't know little potatoes. And so that was sort of a bit of a selling point that we had to position it as this was value added. And at that time I didn't know that, but the large potato category was on the decline. It had been on the decline for decades and continues actually to be on the decline, with the exception of the COVID years. So there was always that, it's an old category, wasn't doing much, kind of always on the decline, but it was all about volume. And so to come in and position a product as a value added, higher price, not a lot of volume, that was sometimes a hurdle to get past with a buyer. And then the other thing in the very beginning, regulations didn't allow you to sell potatoes in anything less than a 3-pound bag. So we had to lobby the government to get smaller pack sizes. So that was a lesson too on how to maneuver through that and network and find the right people. Mm-hmm. I think my big lesson in the first few years is really, this is where hard work, rolling up your sleeves and doing every bit of the business is, I think, where you get the most experience actually. When you start a business is kind of touching everything. But I mean, I say that to my kids too, like hard work is probably one of the biggest ingredients to success. Yep. So I would say those would be the big things. I mean, as it snowballed from there, I'd also say resilience. In going from A to B, sometimes you got to go A, B, C, and then, so I figured that out too, is that sometimes the way you planned it isn't the way it ends up having to go.
Yeah, there's a lot of kind of curveballs along the way.
Yeah.
Okay. So you talked about how, at the beginning you kind of partnered with your dad on doing this, and eventually, I'm sure there's a point there where you went from kind of working with your dad to transitioning more into that leadership and CEO type role.
Yeah.
How did you go about kind of getting your own leadership perspective and skills and ideas while still trying to honor some of that legacy or some of his ideas?
Good one. So I will say this, my dad never wanted to be the CEO. I think he really recognized that was something that I probably would be better at than him. So that was never a contention where he ever wanted to lead the company. He was very much of a support and sort of a servant like leadership for me. Mm-hmm. I've always been and to this day, I crave learning. I love learning. I like reading. I like going to executive programs. I go to peer groups. I have an advisory board. I have coaches. So this thirst for always wanting to learn and do things better has probably been the biggest thing to my leadership development. I think the other piece is two is I have the ability to not be afraid to say I don't know and go ask for help and go get experts that can come and help me. And I did that in the beginning with really building a great team, and I used a fractional model. I still do to this day. Yeah. When I need experts, I can bring them in fractionally. And I think the other thing that probably has really helped develop my leadership is I don't like making mistakes, but I'm not afraid of them. And in fact, when I do make them, I actually take the time to dissect them a bit, do a lot of self-reflection, pull the learning from it, then let it go and move on.
Okay. So really almost that like very kind of humble and authentic approach of not taking yourself too seriously and learning from things that happen along the way and not being afraid to ask for help. Kind of
100%. Yeah.
Okay. So you mentioned kind of that continuous learning part. So, how has that kind of influenced your career and your leadership throughout the years?
Okay, so I put an advisory board together fairly early on, and so that network has always helped me. I do a Harvard executive program. I did executive programs at U of A, and so I will put myself out there to and often it's this, and that's usually my note that I think I'm going to learn something is you get that little bit uncomfortable nervousness when you step into something like that. And often I'll have that in peer groups as well. I started off in entrepreneurs organization and moved to YPO. And I remember when I moved there, I was like, I'm around all these people that have billion-dollar companies. And it was a nice uncomfortable, but I will purposely put myself in those situations where I can learn from other people's experiences.
Yeah, and that's, I think, a key part of actually what I've learned about Little Potato Company too is you also invest in that with other people.
Yes, I do.
So my very first experience with Little Potato Company was actually in a peer group that Sandy and I were in together.
Oh, right.
So we went out to your old facility and had a tour. And so it's that kind of commitment that you see it as valuable, but you're also investing in it for your people, which is huge.
Yeah.
So, I think that leads me a little bit into, you're really looking at building kind of that collaborative environment. You're trying to build, this leadership approach for yourself and your executive team with kind of a lot of vulnerability and authenticity.
Yes.
How does that play into kind of where you are today and the team that you've built around you?
So I'll back up. One of the things that I think flows through the company is our 5 core values, which has been, I think, the anchor for recruiting, but also retaining people. So you already have that sort of foundation kind of set. We all agree this is how we're going to play. We're going to get stuff done, but this is how we're going to do it. And I think in leadership with anything, when you want something to happen, like whether it's authentic, not afraid to learn or not afraid to admit a mistake, you always do it by example. So I will try to do that as openly as I can with my executive team, and I think that gives them permission to do the same. So that's how it plays out. I love collaboration, and so in order to do that, you have to have different perspectives at the table. And so I like being really inclusive, and the company is very inclusive. We have lots of people at the table to get different perspectives. So people feel heard before we move forward on something.
Yep. Okay. Nice. And so you mentioned kind of the importance of those values. And one of your values is family. Right?
Yeah.
So tell me more about that. Like, how is that lived throughout the organization?
Oh, so that's really good. So family is one of them, and it's just the importance that family plays in everybody's lives, not just in the business, but that we believe. And however your family looks, that's a really important resource for people, and to make sure that they have the time for that. And whatever balance looks like for them, I'm not prescriptive about that, but I definitely give autonomy for people to understand that. But I think how it plays out at Little Potato Company is that, and I believe this sort of runs through almost every family business, is that there's a quality and care for the product or the service you have, and a quality and a care that you have for people. That is more important than profits. Yes, we want profits and we want to make money, but I think that is pretty unique to family businesses, is that there's a more emphasis on the quality of the product and the care for the people.
Yep. And that's right before the show, we were talking about how, some of the stats of family business.
Yeah.
And we were talking about how, I was telling you, like 55% of charitable donations come from family business. And, that kind of commitment that they have to the community really kind of emphasizes and reinforces some of that. So one of the other things I wanted to talk about on the family side is you've built a pretty amazing company and career for yourself, but you're also a mother. You've been raising your kids. How have you managed that, and how have you been able to balance that over the years?
I would say poorly at times. So there's an analogy I had given and I'd shared with a group once, and I once had it on a board in my hallway. I don't any longer, but it might be something I should resurrect. And it was just, it was 4 buckets, my 4 buckets of life: work, family, myself, and then my marriage. And so just always being aware of where each of them are at. My default is I love working. It comes very naturally for me to work hard. So that's my default, it's my autopilot. So I had to be really aware of where the levels of my other buckets were at, and just know that I had to very intentfully then start filling them up. And so at times, yes, buckets got depleted. I've had some pretty good health scares, and those are always my warning signs, obviously, that that bucket has been emptied. And so I would say I'm much more, I learned the hard way, I'm much more aware of being more planned and intentful about how I balance my life. And I'll say that it doesn't happen every day. Sometimes it doesn't happen every week. Sometimes there's a year that you don't have very good balance. But I work hard so that at the end of my life that it's been balanced. Yeah,
and that's where like balance is like work-life balance is a bit of a misnomer.
It is,
in that it's really hard to figure out what that balance is. But it's more about how do you make sure that those 4 buckets are all as full as they can be, and that you're kind of getting that personal satisfaction out of all of them. And that can change as our careers and families and situations change. So you go back to values one more time before we kind of move on.
Yeah, sure.
How do you kind of see those values kind of maybe above and beyond family playing out in the organization?
Okay, so we've got family, we have elevate others, and that in essence is really to recognize everybody's gifts. Everybody comes with different experiences that they bring to the table, and that's sort of how that plays out in perspectives and honoring what people bring to the company, because they bring a lot of stuff to the company that they've gotten through their other life and work experiences. Go beyond, that's always, and I'll tell you the story about how we came up with our values, because I think it was an important lesson for me that I do share with others. So at the very beginning, we had a great facilitator coach that, said, I think you should nail down your values. So the exercise is if you would start the company over again, and it says mission to Mars, who would you send and why? So that's how we kind of formulated. So there was a woman at the company that was just the most incredible, warm, welcoming person. So that's where the down-to-earth one came from. Elevate others had come from my husband. He had a notorious way of looking at people's resumes, and we had a lot of immigrants, still do, and be able to look at people's resumes, and I'm like, wow, like you have all this experience, you should be doing this job instead. So that was birthed out of being inspired by people that worked in the company that for a characteristic that we admired. And so that's how that was started. And so that's how the values, and they still are today, the same. I wordsmithed them a tiny bit a couple years ago just to kind of keep up with the times, but the 5 values are still exactly the same.
Nice. Yeah. It's pretty special that you're able to link them back to individuals that have made a difference in the company as well. Do those individuals know that they were kind of the example of that?
Good question. That's actually a really good question. There might have been 1 or 2 in the room when we were brainstorming it, but there might have been a couple that weren't. It'd be a really neat conversation to go back and say, absolutely.
Hey, this value, that's because of you.
That was a characteristic we admired in you.
So, you mentioned, kind of at the very beginning, you went from that 1 acre of test land or test plot, and you've grown pretty substantially. I think it's, about 14,000 acres under management or ownership or contract, whatever the right terminology or lingo is.
Contract,
you have products in 20,000 stores, way bigger than you probably ever thought at the farmer's market side of things. How how did you get there? Like, what were some big moments that led you to that level of expansion and growth?
Okay, so if I look at Canada, because we were in Canada probably for at least 15 years before we started doing any kind of exporting. So I would say in Canada, obviously that first, the IGA, that was sort of, okay, wow, good solid foundation, Alberta. Then we got a few other big retailers in Western Canada, Safeway, and then Costco. And then the big one for us in Canada was Loblaw. And we managed to win the private label President's Choice program with them. And that was the thing that made us national. Okay. So that was a big thing for us. And it was also our first dibble dabble into private label. Mm-hmm. And that was a big dibble dabble because Loblaw is the biggest retailer in Canada. So there were some late nights on their first few orders. Then in the US, we just sort of picked at certain regions. I would probably say the real big one that got us really on the map was Walmart. Mm-hmm. And there's an interesting story behind that. We were at a trade show, and I remember the buyer's name and everything. And I actually saw him 2 years ago at a trade show. He came and sought me out. And then actually his wife came and said something to me too. But the story was we were at a trade show, and a lot of retailers will flip their badges because they don't want to be bombarded by people. So he came up and he was talking to me about the product, and I was, just chatting away with him. And so he flipped his badge and he's like, well, how come you haven't come seen us yet? And I'm like, you're Walmart because I'm scared of you. And so that was a story there. And he was like, look I will ease you into this. We will work with you. We'll give you division by division. And so that was a really big, obviously, that was a really big win for us. And then, it just went from there. The Costco's and the Sam's Clubs in the U.S. now too. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So
then after we got some scale, we realized we had to actually put a stake in the ground in the U.S. And so we ended up in just outside of Madison, Wisconsin. We have a big growing region, and we built a facility there in 2017.
Okay. Nice. Yeah. That was one of my next questions. That's a pretty big milestone of having a big U.S. base.
Yep.
How did you kind of decide that this was something you had to do? And what advice would you give to other people who might be looking to, start a division in the U.S.?
Okay, so it is scary. There were a couple of years of it, us not making money at all. And partly was because you put a lot of money into infrastructure and you don't have the volume yet garnered in that new plant because you've got to build up the potato supply in that region. So we had exported first from our Canadian facility. So we have a co-packing partner in Prince Edward Island, a family that we've been working with for a while. So between those two facilities, we were exporting.
Okay.
But we knew at some point, if we really wanted to get into one of the largest markets in the world, we needed to establish ourselves there. So we knew strategically we had to find a growing region and build a facility. And so we did all our research and figuring out where we should do that. And so that was after, obviously, I had done all the interviewing of potential U.S. partners and realized, and what the critical piece was that we weren't going to align on values.
Yeah.
And we were going to be sort of this product that they did at the side of their desk. And for us, this was all we did. It was 100% what we did. So I knew that at some point we would have to do it ourselves. So that was a big leap. What I learned from that, one was, I think, and a lot of Canadian companies do that, we don't understand the scope and size of that market.
Yeah.
We just don't. Like a retailer like Loblaw is the size of a retailer in Texas. Like it's just, so scale really, I think, caught us off guard. And I don't think we were strategic enough in just picking a region and a small region like Northeast or the West Side and just really building up the volume there. We kind of went at it like, get listings everywhere.
Okay.
And then logistics and all of that became an absolute nightmare for us. So that would be you almost have to treat each region in the U.S. as its own country because it is kind of the size of Canada. So that was our biggest lesson in scale.
Yep. So kind of breaking it into smaller
Yep.
pieces
Yep.
and going to grow that way.
Yep.
And then, so probably today the supply chains are two separate ones
So
between Canada
they're-
and the US.
Yes, but they're run by the same team. Yeah, so they manage and figure out the supply chain management of the 3 plants that we have, and between those 3 plants, we deliver to all the states, all the provinces, and now we're into Mexico as well. So between those 3 facilities.
Okay. So the
Yeah.
3 facilities are Alberta, PEI, and Wisconsin.
Wisconsin, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and how do you kind of see that strategy kind of playing into current times with some of the tariffs and things like that?
Yeah. So one was it's been 7 years since we built that facility in Wisconsin. So we've had plans to go look at it and expand it. We had enough room there to be able to do that. So we're probably just going to speed that up. And do some more investment into the plant in Madison, Wisconsin. We just built the facility here just outside of Edmonton in Nisku.
Yep.
And so we'll probably mirror that and build one in there. And with that, we'll have to increase our production down there. And we knew this before. We've had other kind of things that kind of gave us little, flags that, this is a border we don't control. Mm-hmm. And we're really learning that right now.
Yeah.
So the strategy to have a more production and growing in the U.S. will just speed that up now.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And then would you service Mexico from Canada?
From the U.S. right now.
US right now?
Mexico won't accept Canadian potatoes. We're working on that, but I know. Yeah.
Okay. So, and we talked a little bit about how, the big potatoes or potatoes are a declining category.
Yeah.
But you've had some pretty big success with the little potatoes that are kind of a growing category.
Yeah.
More by, kind of looking at like, what is it that created that success? Is it like the convenience? Is it the new packaging, the smaller packages? Is it are they healthier? Like, why is that one growing?
Yeah, no, that's, so I think first of all, there's a love of potatoes, period. So household penetration of potatoes is like 95%. So that means at some point, every house has a potato. We didn't have to educate anybody on that. Mm-hmm. But I think the big thing for us is, one, I think what sells it, it feels like family. It's a family farm that grew it. It's a family that produced it and packed it and now is selling it. It's easy. You don't have to peel the potato. It's really easy to do. You can microwave them in 5 minutes or boil or roast. And they are really healthy for you. And so I think those 3 combos are what is making this a really good brand.
Okay. And you're kind of more of a premium, higher priced potato.
Yep.
How does that play into doing the co-packing for places like Walmart or Loblaws or things like that?
We still get a good gross margin for that. So it's not like that takes away from us. I will say we debated that for years, ever doing private label, because we really wanted to build a brand. But we recognized that good private label programs actually help build the category. And that's ultimately what we want to do, is build the little potato category. And so if we have pieces of that, then we benefit from all of it. So, yeah.
Okay. So you talked a little bit about innovation and kind of coming up with new ideas and new approaches, really playing into that success. Probably, I think, like from some of the other things I've seen more in like product development and sustainability and things like that. Do you have some kind of examples of how you've done some of these things, whether it's new potatoes or the sustainable initiatives you put in the new facility, in terms of kind of how you use innovation to grow and compete?
Maybe I'll go chronologically. So had to lobby for smaller pack sizes. So we could lobby now. Now we can sell them in a 1 pound, 1.5 to all the way up to 3. So that was sort of the first piece of innovation. We knew we couldn't put, a whole bunch of little potatoes in a 5 pound bag, although we do now for Costco and Sam's Club. But typical family probably would want a smaller pack. So that was the first one. Some, I will say, came out of, sometimes innovation comes out of mistakes and just laziness. So we have a tri-pack. So it's a red, yellow, and blue in the bag. Mm-hmm. And I remember that coming off of probably a long week on a Friday, and we had to wash some potatoes. I think it was for food service. And we just said, just dump them all in the washer and we'll sort them later. And out they came out of the washer on the line. And it was just, we were all stunned. We were standing there like, that's beautiful. Let's make a package out of that. So that was the we call it Terrific Trio or the medley pack. So that was one. Then obviously the famous pack in Costco and Sam's Club is just the red and the yellow. That came out of, we ran out of blues. And so we pitched to Costco, why don't we just do a yellow and red? And that SKU completely took off. So there's always a lot of innovation that happens at the farm level. Agronomically, we've been able to take varieties that, that yielded so much, and then with different practices and different spacing and different nutrients, we were able to increase the yield. So there's that kind of innovation that happens in the NISCU plant in a new build. We did a lot of innovation with automation and AI and data and all that kind of stuff. So, and then in the product development, spice pack, we did microwave and an oven tray. And then we do something for food service, which is a value-added, already cooked. We don't offer it retail yet. So that was sort of birthed out of that. And then there's always stuff that happens in the back end, on how we do things with finance and processes. There's always, I think, innovation. Sometimes it's not the fun stuff that ends up on a shelf, but it's how we do business is sometimes. And I love that, and I super encourage that, because I think that's still how the entrepreneurial spirit lives in the company, is through the innovation and people always trying to figure out a different and a better way to do it.
Yeah, well, it seems like a lot of the decisions you've made, even that you've just walked me through so far, are still go back to your values.
Yeah.
Which is pretty amazing to see companies, that committed to their values, where they're willing to make, strategic decisions on where they expand based upon that value set that's ingrained in that organization. Yep. And a lot of companies would ignore that.
Oh, okay.
But it's pretty amazing that you kind of stuck to that. So tell me more about maybe some of those other new potato products, like the pre-made or the value-added ones. That
one I'm really excited about. We did a trial run of that in retail, and we learned through that it didn't work. But partly I think it was because how we approached it. So I'm excited about that kind of stuff because it still honors. It's still little potatoes. It's not a big potato, but it's pre-cooked. It's got spicing to it, and it makes it really easy for a chef in the back end of the kitchen to add, small potatoes to the plate or to the meal. Yep. So that kind of stuff. We also did some work on a roasting product, so I'd like to see that come to market in the next couple of years for sure. Yeah. And then we tried to launch, it's in a trial right now in 2 retailers in the US, just little potato company spices for, if you buy a fresh bag of potatoes, you can buy the spices too. Okay. So we're giving that a shot right now. Yeah.
Nice. Okay. So we talked a little bit about, earlier about your kind of the family connection, and as a mother growing this business, you're growing a multinational company as well. You're probably all over the place, between Canada and the US, things like that. Let's go a little bit deeper into how you balance some of these things.
Okay. And I will say there was times like where all of that just came to a head. You're trying to grow a business. You've got young kids, a fairly new marriage, and you're running yourself ragged. So I think there was a good part of my 30s that I quite honestly didn't think I was doing anything right, like nothing right. Yep. And so I think what I did try to do is when I was home, I tried to be as present as possible. So do things with the kids, movie night. And it seems small, but it's pretty significant. I think when I look back, because I have these chats with my kids on, I felt like an absent mother sometimes, and their feedback was like, "That's not how we saw it, Mom." Like, so that was my perspective, not theirs, and so maybe it for them it was reflected in the quality of the time I spent with them. But I also learned, even with young kids, I was really clear and transparent about, okay, I'm leaving Monday, I'm coming back Wednesday, this is where I'm going. And I learned not to underestimate their understanding of things. Even at a young age, they could get it. And if I had to show them on the calendar, so I had one kid that, no, you need to take me to the calendar. I need to see it. Okay, got it. And then just also learning when you come back into that is every kid adapted differently. So I, one was just, oh, mom's home. And another one would be very much like, I'm going to regulate how you re-enter. And so just being very respectful of that with my kids on how they saw that. I also did from the very beginning, and this is also might be why their answer is different than mine, is when they were younger and where it was possible, I would take them on trips with me. So they would each get a turn coming with me. So they've been to all sorts of places in the world, been to trade shows, been to breeding programs in Chile, and seen our growers in California. And so I did that for quite a while, probably up until they hit high school. And so I think they got to see my world a little bit more. So I think that might have helped them too. So I involved them in that kind of stuff. And then if we would do like launch days, annual launch days at the company, I'd say, why don't you come in and sit in on what some of the people are presenting? And so even at a young age, they would sit there, and I'm sure they would twirl their chair, but nonetheless. So I think that's also how I probably integrated them a little bit more into my life, was through that. Now that they're older, they have summer jobs at the company. They pack potatoes, they sweep floors, they do all of that. They start at the beginning. And I think now that they're in their 20s, there's a lot more different conversations we have about, how to read a financial statement and, product development and how do you place product. And those are fun conversations to have because, 3 out of the 4 are in business school. So now you have different conversations with them.
Yeah, that was okay. So my next question kind of builds on that. So what kind of ideas or rules or principles do you have about engaging your kids in the business? So like, when would you bring them in? How would they have to act, or what would they do? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
So ground rules are right for now, because they just have summer jobs. It's you enter where you enter. Like, you don't skip levels. You get paid what everybody else gets paid. You don't get, I had one son that would be notorious for being late, and I would tell his supervisor, you need to give him crap. So same rules applied. We really agreed that there were going to be no exceptions to that they had to learn hard work, and they had to work alongside people. And part of that was because I remember my older son, this was one summer, and he came home complaining because, this one machine wasn't working and my back hurts and all this kind of stuff. Why do I have to do this? And so I reframed it for him, and I said, son, if you ever want to move into management, you understanding what some of these jobs are in the company will make you a better manager. You'll be more empathetic and understand what they have to do every day. And in return, you'll get more respect because you work side by side of them. And so then I never heard him complain after that. So he understood now that's part of the journey. What I am working on with my brothers is, once when they graduate college, and if they decide, I've never put pressure on the kids to, you have to be in the family business. I want them to have their own life and their own choices. So again, how it lands with different kids. And I had the conversation, I want you to choose to be in here. I don't want you to feel obligated. So my second oldest son is like, I've always understood that I'll have a choice. And then my third oldest son, he goes, that's not how I took it.
Interesting.
He said, you've never invited me. And I was like, what the heck? So I was like, okay, I don't mean to be aloof about it, but I still want you to choose, but of course I'd love it, but I don't want those words to assume that you have to be obligated to it.
Yeah.
So good part of the work I'm doing now is all on governance and what are the further rules of engagement of family and business. Yep. And then how do you deal with conflict? Because it happens. And it's usually uglier than normal.
Yep.
And then how do you maintain the employee versus owner role?
Yep.
And making sure what hat you have on when you walk in. including myself. When I walk in, I'm an employee, I'm a CEO, and I follow the rules of which are governed by whatever policies we have, PPE in the plant. I don't walk around that.
Yep.
I don't have to do that. So it's doing that now also with the engagement of the kids coming into the business. What does that look like for them?
Yep.
And we're figuring that out right now.
Yeah, so kind of regardless of the role,
Yep.
how does their expectations and
Yep.
behavior change, whether they're a family member, an
Yes.
owner, or an employee?
Yep. Yep. Yeah.
Okay. And what about other people in your family in the business?
So my dad was in it for many, many years. We did succession planning with him in 2014. And I got to tell you, it was a very beautiful way of doing it. My dad just did it with such respect and admiration. And a few years later after that, we also did further succession planning on, some of the land and the farms he owned in Saskatchewan. And an absolute gift in how he did it. Extremely transparent, let go, yet still was supportive. So very beautifully done. So that was sort of the first. And so I worked with my dad for a very long time. And there were many years that we did not get along. There was a lot of, I think a good part of his frustration probably came out of a fear of he didn't want me to fail. So I know now, I translate that into that was a deep love. It maybe showed up weirdly sometimes, but it was definitely come from a deep love of me not wanting to fail. So my husband's been involved in and out of the business. He was a plant manager. Well, he worked on the farm first and was a plant manager. Then he went off and did his own business, and then came back and did capital assets. And now he's head of design and facilities. So he built that Nisku facility for the family. And my brother runs the breeding program. So we have a sister company that manages all the variety development. So he runs that. And then, as I said, my kids have done summer jobs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. And do you know how many of them want to work in the business yet? Or are they still figuring that out?
I would say probably 3 out of the 4 will. My oldest is an artist, and he's well on his way and is quite successful. So I don't think, and he did summer jobs too, but I don't think, unless the art world falls apart, he's probably not coming back. The other 3 have expressed interest. I don't know how that will show up. I think at the very least what we're doing now with my kids, but also my nieces and nephew, is teaching them how to be good owners. At the very least, you need to be a very good owner. You might not be management, or you might not even choose to work in the company, but being a good owner is it's a very important role. And so teaching them how to do that.
Yeah, it's a hard skill to learn too.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Maybe one other kind of family element I wanted to talk about was how do you look at kind of how the family or where you are in your family stage influences some of your business decisions? And then maybe how your business decisions influence your family as well. Like how do those two play together?
Oh, yeah. Good. Okay, so where I'm at, so one thing that I did, which might be of interest to the audience, is this was several years ago, and I worked with one of my advisory board members on this, and it came out of because I had a health scare. I had breast cancer when I was 39. So that was sort of like, oh God, this could happen anytime. We built what's called a corporate will. And in that corporate will is sort of this 90-day plan, if something would happen. And it's written down to like the first 2 hours. Here's what you do. It's documented. And then it moves through how we move an advisory board into a fiduciary board. It names who my successor is, even in the interim. And here's the recruitment process. So it's really laid out. And I did that obviously because I love the people that work at LPC, and I'd never want that to be in jeopardy because of something that happens to me, but also clarity for my family. Yep. So it runs parallel to that. Is called a 60-day plan, and that's basically the same thing on here's what the family's got to do. Wow. So that's one thing I did, and then just always I love org design, and I always like looking at what would serve the company better now. So looking at sort of what my next role is and global expansion. And if that's where my value is, and I'm, have to look at how I would run North America differently. So I'm always looking at that. And then as far as business decisions that affect the family. So obviously the moving into the US was a very big one. And that one actually provided a really great opportunity for our family. So we actually moved to Madison in 2017. What was supposed to be only for like a 2-year stint, and 7 years later. So the kids go to college down there. And so that was, I think, an amazing experience. So that's one big way that it has influenced.
Yeah.
And then just, I think, the ability for the kids to have access and have experienced different parts of the world because of where our breeding programs are and where we sell our product. I think that's been, a really positive effect on the family that those decisions have been made. I will share, when the kids were younger, you never think they're paying attention, but they're always paying attention. And they were still in high school or, elementary when some of these comments were made, but they were very much, we're not sure if we want to run it. Like, they're 15, 16, but they were like, but please don't sell it. They were like, we love the business and we love what you do. And that was really interesting for me to hear because, you think they're off in their own little world, but they were paying attention, and there was I think a pride and a love for the family business that I think I didn't recognize. So that was really, I think, good for me to hear, which then spawned for me. It was like, okay, then you got to learn to be good owners. If you don't work in the business, you got, at least if you want to keep it, then you have to learn how to do this. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
So you mentioned, right, with that kind of transition plan, you have the advisory board that almost has that like shotgun clause into a fiduciary board as part of a protection mechanism.
Yes.
Do you have plans to go to a fiduciary board before then? Like, is that something you would explore?
No.
No? Okay.
No. So I was at our advisory board won Best Advisory Board in Canada award, which was super exciting for them. And so I was on a panel, and a woman at the back asked, like, why haven't you moved to fiduciary board? And I said, honestly, because I still want to call the shots. And she's like, okay, great. And that's the truth. Right now, my advisory board is unbelievable. They're incredibly supportive. I say it's my safe place to struggle. And they're there for me. They let me know of my blind spots. They let me know when I'm like, hey, you got to pay attention to that, or great job here. So they've been absolutely instrumental in the growth of the company, but also the growth of me.
Wow.
Yeah. So I'm sure there'll be a day when I'll be saying, yeah, I'm good now, and fiduciary board it is. But right now, I still love making the decisions. And there's, I will say, not a lot that end up coming to my table.
Yep.
So I've got an amazing team that makes a tremendous amount of great decisions on how to run the business. So I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah, no, it was just one of those things that came up when you were talking about that.
No, it's a good question.
About the maturity, or the evolution. So looking towards the future, so you've talked a little bit about global expansion and how do you do things different in North America. What do you see as the future? What do you see Little Potato Company becoming? What's your vision?
And I'll say this first because I am not, anybody that's met me will say I'm not driven by money. So one of our things is we want to be $1 billion company, and we want to have a really good, recognized, well-respected, loved brand. I do foresee in the future we'll be in other products like value-added products, pre-cooked products that you'll see in retail, not just in food service. And I do see that we will be in other regions, in particular probably Australia and Southeast Asia, and maybe Europe at some point.
So when you kind of referenced other products, would that mean you're moving away from just potatoes? Or no? Okay.
We are going to stick with Little Potatoes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure what you were meaning there.
I know. We're a one-trick pony. That's all we're doing.
Okay. And I don't know if I know this part, but where did the name come from? Like, I know the potatoes are little, but.
Well, this is a great question. That wasn't our original name.
Okay.
We named ourselves Gourmet Produce, which is like really not inspiring at all.
Yeah.
And so we had that name for, I think, maybe 2 years. And we got a letter from a lawyer saying, hey, you have to change your name. We've already trademarked the word gourmet in reference to produce, and this is a cease and desist letter. And of course, you get those and you're like, oh no, it's the end of the world. So we went to the shareholders at that time, and there was, I think, 7 or 8 of us, and we said, throw out any name. And we had a list of probably, and one of the shareholders actually had the piece of paper and he sent it to me. So I am going to frame it. And it had, I'm going to say 30 or 40 names on it. So we took it out to everybody and said, put 5 votes. And the Little Potato Company is one of them. And it won out clearly. And so there's one of those things where you get a challenge and you're forced to go in a different direction. And it was the absolute best thing to have happened.
Wow. And
yeah.
Do you remember any of the other names? Like, was there a second, like
probably
a runner-up?
Harvest Moon or like, I can't remember. Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah. I actually, thanks for reminding me, because I have it actually on my phone, and I'm gonna print what he sent me and actually frame it, because that was a very important moment for us.
Yeah, it's a pretty neat kind of legacy piece, both for you, but also for future generations in the company.
Like, and then when we did actually a rebrand in 2014 or 15, we actually put the name back on the table. And so there was a few other names that came out, and I would say I was fearful about doing that, but at the same time, I'm looking, hey, if consumers are not grabbing to this, but again, it went out, and so then I was like, hey, that never needs to be brought up again. Yeah, that's the name. Yeah.
Nice. And it's like everyone knows what you sell. Like,
yes, I know. Yeah.
Cool. So one of the other questions I like to ask in every single version of this, or in as many of these versions of this podcast that I remember, is, on kind of that continuous learning framework, is there kind of a book or something that you have to recommend to people that you say, hey, you have to read this, something that's really kind of made an impact in your life, whether it was professionally or even personally?
You know what? I probably have a list of books, but I won't pivot on that. And I'll tell you why. I think what has always been the most impactful for me is people sharing their experiences and their stories. Mm-hmm. That to me has always been better than any book I've ever read. Yep. It's whether it's my advisory board or a close friend that also runs a business, or an organization like Entrepreneurs Organization, YPO, you name it. It's the sharing of experiences that people have gone through, whether challenges or wins. Are typically challenges. Yep. Those have always been probably the most impactful way that I have learned. So if I could gather all of that and put it in a book, that would be the book. Yep. Yeah. Okay. So
it's more just kind of the value of learning from experience and learning from your peers. From
people. Yeah. Because there's things that happen when that sharing is done. There's emotions that you catch on. There's a personal lesson that person got from that. Yep. That's not always expressed in a technical book. And so that's why I think that's always been the most valuable for me.
Nice. Well, that fits really well into both kind of the reason this podcast exists and the reason ABFI exists is, we kind of see part of our mission of telling the story of family businesses and business families and sharing some of that advice and knowledge wherever we can. Yeah. So I'm really grateful for you spending some time with us today and sharing your story and some of your successes and challenges. And really, that piece around peer learning is really powerful as well. One of the things we offer at ABFI is actually a next-gen peer forum. So we had it historically, and we're really excited to be relaunching it right now. So actually a dedicated, peer group for next-generation leaders in family businesses. So we're really excited for that and kind of the impact it can have on some of those future leaders. Really enjoyed our conversation today, kind of the a couple of things that stick out is really just the importance of developing those values and using them to make your decisions, and whether it's in your personal life or professional business.
Yeah.
So kind of both those, how you fill those buckets and how you make decisions to expand globally were both kind of value-led conversations that you talked about.
Thank you for that.
And then lastly, just, the power of innovation, and also really insightful to hear your thoughts around what you're doing to prepare that next generation of owners.
Yeah.
So something that's often overlooked, but a really important part of building the business family is looking at the role of the owner and how are they going to get those skills around governance and succession to, help the business, whether they're in it or not.
Yeah. Cool.
Absolutely enjoyed our conversation.
So did I.
My final question is, what is your favorite way to eat little potatoes?
So they're leftover potatoes,
Okay.
and then I slice them, and I put a little bit of butter, and then salt and pepper, and I pan fry them. And then I'll do a fried egg and maybe sliced tomato. That's my favorite way.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, there's something about leftover potatoes that taste really good.
I
too.
know.
Yeah.
I agree.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And then if people want to learn more about you or the Little Potato Company or try some of your potatoes, if for some reason they haven't had them yet, where do they go? Where do they
Well,
look?
our website's fantastic, and I had nothing to do with it. So it's a great website. You'll get a lot of information there, but most of our product is sold in every retailer store pretty much in Canada. So you could probably walk into any store and you'll find it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Angela. Really appreciated you being on the show. Almost said it on the store, on the show today. Thank you again. And this has been another episode of Table Talk. If you enjoy it as a listener, please subscribe. Please share it with anyone in your network that needs to hear stories of business families and learn more about what's needed for business family owners or managers or employees and how they develop their futures. And so thank you again.
Thank you.
This series is proudly produced by the team at Road 55. Road 55 creates content that connects. For more information, visit our website at road55.ca.